Let's hear it again for Dennis and his bravery. Kudos in reading a very difficult text with confidence. Will you pray with me? Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us. Open our ears and our hearts and our minds to the revelation of your good news today and every day. Amen. I want to begin by just taking a quick survey to see if most of us are on the same page. Raise your hand if your eyes kind of gloss over and you disassociate from your body for a minute when you come across a biblical genealogy full of the begats. Yes, okay. Do you tend to, like me, skip through that list? Maybe just looking for a few names that might be easy to pronounce, like Jacob, or Joseph, or Ruth. Looks like most of us feel the same way about these lists that begin in Genesis with the biblical genealogy of Adam. There are about 24 of these genealogy lists in the Hebrew Bible, and then 2 in the Gospels, one in Matthew and one in Luke that tell the genealogy of Jesus as part of the birth narrative. Now, these lists are boring to us, but they were anything but boring to the original listeners. These lists are loaded with meaning for those who recognize the names and the stories behind those names. In her book, isn't it beautiful to hear the rain? I'm sorry for those of you worshiping online. Imagine the rain pitter-patter on the roof of the church. It's beautiful. In her book, Grounded, Diana Butler Bass writes that these lists tell stories of belonging, of our sacred location in God, and in knowing our roots, we come to know ourselves. Now, there's one thing that we must know as we approach any consideration of these biblical genealogies. That is that they are not intended to be accurate representations of history. Meaning that in the case of Methuselah, for example, who shows up on one of the major genealogies in the Hebrew Bible, it's highly unlikely that he really did live to be 969 years old, as the genealogy suggests. I don't want to shock anyone here by making that claim. Excuse me. I'm going to cough periodically. I hope that we can just move through that. Instead, there must be some story of Methuselah that the genealogy is hoping to tell those who knew him about his life. The audience of the original genealogy would know why 969 years old was so important for Methuselah. In their original context, genealogies were provided, according to Diana Butler Bass again, to secure political or priestly legitimacy through kinship. These records established certain lines for passing on possessions and property, along with role and rank and authority, power. These genealogies are more than mere bookkeeping, though. They serve as kind of a primary tool in handing down the traditions from one culture, one tribe, one family unit to another to preserve shared faith practices. Now, all of this makes genealogies controversial for their intended audiences. Our eyes gloss over because we feel so far removed from what these genealogies offer. But in their day, writing a genealogy was a high-stakes process that could either make or break someone's ability to succeed. These genealogies were so powerful that a king or ruler's success depended on whether or not they had the right ancestry in their authorized genealogy. It's no wonder that some of these genealogies don't add up historically, right? If you want to change your future, just change your past. Rewrite your genealogy for a new chance at power and prestige. And that is exactly what sometimes happened in the transfer of power in biblical times. the erasure of someone who would bring shame to the family name, suddenly they disappeared from a genealogy. And the grafting on or the insertion of someone whose name in a genealogy list would boost the prospect of power and prestige suddenly appeared in new genealogies. Now, Butler Bass tells us that when a particular family or ruler came to power, they legitimized their power by claiming ancestry to a good patriarch. And then the next ruling family would do the same, attaching themselves to that same good patriarch. That's what you do in a patriarchal society. So when we read genealogies in the biblical text, we're reading thousands of years of struggle by those included in the genealogical list to make the names of their ancestors honorable, and in doing so, to make themselves worthy of respect and power. Now, with this context, let's approach the genealogy of Jesus as the introduction to his birth narrative in the Gospel according to Matthew. I am not going to attempt to read any of the names because Dennis did so beautifully for us. But the very first verse in Matthew chapter 1 at the head of this genealogy list says, an account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now I can already see your eyes glazing over. I saw it, Donna. Just a vacant look in your eyes. Do you see the power that the author is claiming in this verse? This coming child would be the son of David and the son of Abraham? Now, imagine a Jewish audience who's hoping for the arrival of a Messiah, for the one who would be the king of the Jews, who would usher in some type of liberation from the oppressions of the Roman Empire. A new king who would follow in the footsteps of David and restore the power of Israel. But they're also looking for someone who will restore the temple, who will be the spiritual leader that they need in order to remain faithful to the God of Abraham. And here, in this one verse, the author of Matthew tells the listener that the genealogy to follow is the one who contains the power and authority to do both, as the son of David and as the son of Abraham. And as a result, the genealogy of Jesus includes names we'd expect to see to suggest kingly authority. There's Jesse and David and Solomon. Great names of kings who ruled and their ancestors. But the list also includes names of those whose faith is what defined them. Tamar, Ruth, and Hezekiah, to name a few. In Jesus, these worlds collide, and he embodies all the hopes of his ancestors in both power and faith. Imagine hearing this genealogy for the first time. Your mind would be completely blown at the grafting of one amazing life onto another for the sake of weaving together this great tapestry of God's story made real in Jesus Christ. To give us some context of the power contained in this genealogy, I've created a genealogy to give us perspective on how that original list might have sounded to its intended audience. Now, I have taken some liberties, more than what the biblical writers would have, but I'm hoping to paint a vivid picture for you in this genealogy. An account of the genealogy of Adam the Bradley. The son of Genghis Khan, the son of Martin Luther. Martin Luther was the father of Deepak Chopra, and Deepak Chopra the father of the Dalai Lama and his brother Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh was the son of Mother Teresa and Brene Brown. And Genghis Khan was the father of Alexander the Great, whose sons were Mark Antony and Augustus. Augustus was the father of Cleopatra, and Cleopatra the mother of Henry VI. You see what I mean? Imagine that ancestry. You never knew Adam came from such an interesting gene pool, did you? His mother is here today, which is why I had to choose him. Again, I took names for broad corners of the earth and throughout history and made it entirely unrelated and unrealistic in a way that's contrary to the biblical list, but the idea is the same. To draw connections between the greatest names in the history of all of the Israelites to converge on their one greatest hope, Jesus, the Messiah. The genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1 is a literary marvel that should do anything but cause our eyes to glass over with boredom. It's a finely woven masterpiece that brings us to the person who would change the entire world. Part of its wonder lies in the knowledge of who was included in that list. This beautiful image that I want to show you represents some of the women who appear in the lineage of Jesus. Jesus is represented by the rose at the center of the story. Reverend Lauren Wright Pittman created this image with the women as foundational leaves building and holding up Christ. There's Tamar holding her father-in-law's insignia, the means by which she secured her future and that of her family line. And there's Rahab holding the red cord, which she lowered to ensure the safety of her family after helping the Israelite spies in Jericho. Next is Ruth holding the wheat that she gleaned from the field of Boaz. Then there is Bathsheba, who isn't mentioned by name in the genealogy. Instead, she's simply called the wife of Uriah. But she holds the crown, because she becomes, as Dr. Will Gaffney says, the queen mother of the united monarchy of Israel. And finally, there is Mary. Mary is the only one who is not looking at us. Instead, she's looking adoringly at the rose that represents her son. In her story of this image, the artist, Reverend Lauren Wright Pittman, said that she had to learn to let go of the heaviness of judgment associated with the women in the genealogy of Jesus. She said that there are often words used to describe these women that we have come to learn are simply just not accurate or completely out of context. Words like prostitute or adulterer or seductress have been levied against these women in ways that call us to think of them as less than the game changers that they really were. The artist of this piece shared in her own statement that she had to unbind herself from the limitations placed on these women in their own stories. She found that once she did that, once she let go of all the judgments that she had about who they were, she could see that these women found a way to claim their voice and found power to survive. And that in doing so, they inspired her to do the same, to claim her own voice and recognize her contribution to the ever-expanding story of Christ. Now, knowing what we know about the way in which biblical genealogy is crafted, their inclusion, these women in the lineage of Christ, is meant to highlight these women. Relieve yourselves of any idea that these women were less than. Their very inclusion into that well-orchestrated and crafted genealogy means that these women were as significant in the life of Jesus as David and Abraham. Their stories are Christ's stories. There's room for their stories within the story of Christ, and there is room for our stories as well. On this first Sunday of Advent, as we consider hope, I can't help but look in the faces of these women as they are represented by this artist and see hope. Hope that we will add to the tapestry of God's story. Hope that that genealogy includes us and future generations who will come after us. That the work that they began will continue in us, and that genealogy will continue with a new set of names, with your name, with my name. For most of my childhood, I detested my own name. I knew no one else who shared my name, yet my name was frequently spoken during piano lessons, vocal lessons, choir practice, and so on. My mother loves to tell the story of how upset I became as a small child as the church sang the hymn, "In my heart there rings a melody." And I wept because the whole church was talking about me. As if my first name wasn't enough on its own, I was given the middle name of Faith. And together, Melody Faith, those two sounded so churchy and old lady that it made me angry as I grew up. All I wanted to be was a Jessica or a Jennifer. One day as a teenager, after being teased by my older brother because he knew my weak spot, I confronted my mother about why she chose to name me as she did. I demanded an explanation from her, as only a 15 or 16-year-old would. She tried to be patient with me, but my disdain for my name had hurt her, and the hurt showed in the way that she answered me. "Well, let me see," she said, dramatically. "When you were born, I'd been widowed for 2 months, with a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. I was living in Florida where your dad was stationed when he died, and I knew almost no one there who could help me with 3 kids under the age of 3. There wasn't a day that went by when I didn't wonder how in the world I would even make it through that very day. When you were born, I was terrified until the moment you were put in my arms," she said. "I looked in your face, and I just knew we would be okay. I named you Melody because your birth restored the song into my heart that your father's death had taken away. And I named you Faith because I knew it was faith that would be the only thing that would sustain me for the journey ahead. So, I'm sorry that you hate your name." "But I don't hate it," she said. "I chose it carefully for you, and actually I really love it. But feel free to change it when you're an adult." I stood there in shock, with tears welling up in my eyes, and it was quiet and still for a moment before I blurted out, "I don't hate it, I love it." And I embraced her and thanked her for giving me such a special name. I hugged her with deep gratitude for the story of our family that she passed down to me in my name. And from that day on, I have loved the story of my name. What about you? What is the story of your name? Of your family name? Because the story of your name is written in the genealogy of Jesus the Christ. In the same way that David and Abraham are, do you see that we are a part of the woven tapestry of the ecosystem of God? Your name written there. From generation to generation, names are grafted on and added so that all the world may know God's love. There is room for your story, friends, in the story of Christ that continues to be written from generation to generation. Thanks be to God that you are included. Amen.